Hello, welcome to the Unscripted Pharmacist Podcast. And we're going to talk today about the side effects of statins as well as everything LDL.
This is the Unscripted Pharmacist with Kyle Rootsaert, Doctor of Pharmacy and Board Certified in Advanced Diabetes Management, and Lenora Casey, Oncology Certified Registered Nurse. Because each person is unique, consider this as medical information, not medical advice. See your physician regarding what might be best for you.
Hello.
Hey.
Welcome to our podcast. We're going to talk about something that is kind of confusing.
Yeah, it is.
It is. It's difficult to wrap your head around, but I think for most people that struggle with this understanding of what is cholesterol, as if it's some sort of boogeyman.
Yeah, well, and
right?
it's been demonized for
It's
many
demonized,
years.
right. But even Ansel Keys, who started this path down the, heart hypothesis and saturated fat is bad, him admitted that cholesterol really, it's not the boogeyman. It's not. It varies way too much. I mean, if we even go back to like Eisenhower in the Oval Office, he was checking his cholesterol on a daily basis and realized it fluctuates like 20%.
Wow.
So I kind of feel like, though, this debate about what to eat kind of all comes to a point at statins. Because if saturated fat is really bad, and cholesterol goes up when we eat too much saturated fat, supposedly, then that would not be the ideal diet. Okay? So how does that make any sort of sense in saying that, okay, cholesterol is bad because it went up with saturated fat, along with saturated fat, right? What's the real cause of cardiovascular disease, which is everyone's major concern?
It's usually LDL, though, that everybody freaks out about.
Yes.
Oh, your LDL's so
Right.
high.
Oh, what's your cholesterol? Right, what's your cholesterol? But I think we need to break it down a little bit, because if you just Google metabolic syndrome, okay, what's the incidence? Like, what percentage of the population really has this problem? Okay, so when you start looking at that, it's a lot, and it's not like, this is a rare condition. No, this is like 75% of our population either diagnosed or undiagnosed. Okay, and
Well, you can see it.
yes, and then you go to look at cause, and you get stupid things like it's obesity. But wait a minute, you've got people that are obese and totally healthy. We have more people with metabolic problems that are normal weight, right? We have this huge population. As a matter of fact, 2/3 of people who are obese have this problem. So that means 1/3 doesn't have this problem. Obesity has nothing to do with this. Obesity is a symptom, really, of metabolic syndrome. But when you look up what is metabolic syndrome, 5 things, 5 findings. Okay, elevated blood sugar, okay, diabetes, right? And then you've got high triglycerides, low HDL, expanded waistline, and hypertension. I didn't say LDL. But this is what ails the majority of our population. This is what is going on. This is what we're all scared about, and it is incredibly prevalent. But if you dig a little bit deeper, like what is... So when you Google metabolic syndrome, you'll see, obesity, and they'll say saturated fat or cholesterol, which is that's really a symptom of the metabolic syndrome. But if you read a little bit longer, it'll say insulin resistance. That's the killer. But we're not talking about it.
No,
That's
we're
what
not talking about.
drives me totally bonkers.
We're not talking about that at all.
We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about
Because
insulin.
maybe they were wrong.
Maybe they're wrong. There's a lot of backpedaling to do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I totally get how people are so confused, because when you rely on Google searches, or when you rely on studies and data that are out there, it is very difficult to try to go and decipher through all the noise.
Yeah, there's
right?
a lot of noise.
There's a ton of misinformation. But if you dig deeper, and this takes time, if you care enough about this topic, it takes a lot of time to decipher and wade through the garbage and go, okay, look up dollars for doctors. And so when you look at a study, it's so much fun. I mean, I really do enjoy it. I'm pretty sick. I'm such a nerd. But when I look at something, I go, all right, let's get down to the disclosures part, right? So you look at a study, and it may be on PubMed or something like that, and you look on the left-hand side, just go to the disclosure statement.
Oh, yeah.
And it'll say, this person has financial interest, and they'll list 5 different drug companies at a minimum. So you know that they're collecting money from Big Pharma.
Well, you can do it. So there's one of the graphs that Dr. Ali uses, and he has pharma in the center, and all of the distribution pharma, so not FDA, NIH, all the big ones that all these drugs, the doctors, the universities, everything is touched by pharma, and they're the ones funding all of the studies.
They're funding.
No, not not 100%. There might be, I don't know, 98% of the studies are funded by big pharma because they want their drug to look good.
Right. Prior to 2008, you pretty much could get away with everything. You didn't have to do any disclosures.
Yeah, well, there's also
but that's post-statin studies.
Yeah, well, what happened was they were doing, let's say, 10 studies, and they cherry-picked the study that made their drug look.
That one.
Yeah, so then I think it was around 2004, 2005 that Congress enacted, like, every study that you do has to be published.
Right, which is how it should be. A negative study needs to be published. So if you're a drug company, you'd be like, okay, well, I don't think we're going to do this. This is probably not such a good idea to throw a bunch of money.
Right, after that. But still, they can still twist it.
Oh, for sure.
Because, yes, it decreases, like, okay, so now I'm talking about statins. So it does decrease events. But
did it change the bottom line?
It didn't change the mortality.
All-cause mortality. ACM,
Yeah, because when you look at the studies, and it's fine print at the end of, like, all of it.
Right. Yeah.
0.5%?
Yeah, really, like how many doctors go up to their patients and say, before I put you on Lipitor, I want to make sure that you understand that the best that this drug can do is anywhere between 0.5% and 1% improvement, right, in all-cause mortality. We're going to have to treat 100 patients, because the absolute risk reduction is 1%. So 100 patients to save one person. Okay, that's what I really want to talk about is, what about the other 99 people? They're dealing with side effects, and for decades, lots of side effects for a really, really long time.
Yeah.
And what I've discovered as I looked into cholesterol is really like, this is an ancient biology. This is a beautiful human body, amazing machine, and how all these things are so vitally important for us to function, to replace cells, to move cholesterol and fat throughout the body, right? Like how this is a very complicated and really exquisite, and actually it has so many different negative feedback loops, and it involves so many different systems, and how in the world can you say that's bad when it's been around for millennia?
I don't think people know how important cholesterol is.
Yeah.
So
I mean, as we get into like what does cholesterol do, we're going to talk about like when you reduce it, these are the side effects.
Right.
So we got to talk about normal physiology.
Right. We do.
Yeah.
Okay. So for cholesterol, what does it do for the body?
Oh. Okay.
So we know it's cell membranes, it's cell walls. So every single cell in our body has a cholesterol. It needs cholesterol to form the membranes.
And I think of remember when you were in elementary school and you had these jelly balls?
Yeah.
Right? You could kick the crap out of it and just wham, and that thing, if we had slow motion cameras, we'd see that ball just squeeze really tight and then it change its shape, right? You kicked it really hard, it wouldn't behave properly, like this blob in the air, right? I kind of think that's how our cells are, right? Otherwise, you would kick it and it would just explode, okay? Cholesterol gives it that rigidity. And when I say cholesterol, when we're talking about cholesterol, I want to talk about cholesterol.
Okay.
Okay? I don't want to talk about plant sterols.
No.
Because that's what a plant uses in its cell wall to behave essentially like zoocholesterol, but they're not the same. So, when a red blood cell, like a jelly ball, gets full of plant sterols, fake cholesterol, which the body actually doesn't need or use, okay, that cell wall becomes rigid. So instead of that behaving like a jelly ball, and you've got plant sterols in there that doesn't allow it to be flexible, it makes it rigid, it's going to lyse, it's going to explode, it's not going to be able to do what a red blood cell should do, it's not going to do what a platelet should do, okay, because these membranes of these types of cells, which are involved in clotting, which is really, really important, they don't flex when they have plant sterols in it. So if you eat, hello vegans, if you eat a lot of plant sterols, the body's going to make its own cholesterol at an expensive process, but it's also going to substitute. Instead of having cholesterol there, you're going to have plant sterols there, making the cell more rigid and less pliable. You think about how beautiful a red blood cell is. It's a certain shape for a reason. I mean, it can get through tight spaces.
Well, I mean, it has to. The capillary beds are extremely small.
Right, and it's such tight junctions between the endothelial cells, right? Like, that can't happen if you're rigid. You ain't going to get there, right? So it's vitally important for a cell membrane. So it basically also, because it makes the cell more rigid and also flexible, that you have receptors that can sit upright. And that's really important, right? The fact that an insulin receptor, as important as it is, to sit upright in order for it to function properly, okay? This is probably jumping ahead, but this is how we get diabetes, right? From these drugs.
Exactly.
Right? These receptors are laying down, as well as you think about, let's see, where else do you have a lot of receptors? You know, your nervous system, the brain, right? How are these receptors going to sit straight up if you don't have the cholesterol rafts holding it properly? So it's not just phospholipid membranes, and I think that's important. Phospholipid membrane, fat, right? Which we need in our diet, right? We need to have fat, and you need these particles to move fat throughout the body. It's a boat, submarine, whatever you want to call it, right?
It just takes it everywhere.
It takes it everywhere. It's the only way that you can mix water and fat together. What a beautiful system. How can you say this is bad? You need these boats, right? You got to have these boats. Okay, so these are definitely boats. So and what's interesting is that these boats which move the cholesterol and lipids and other important things, vitamins, especially fat-soluble ones, ADEK, right? All absolutely necessary to sustain life.
Yes.
So they're delivering this precious cargo, right, to the cell. And the only way that the cell, this type of lipoprotein, shall we call it, a lipoprotein, it's a lipid molecule with
holding everything
inside of it, and it's got this protein around it that allows it to interact and communicate with other cells. So this is vitally important to have this protein, not just to allow it to dissolve into a aqueous medium like water, but it also helps it interact and communicate with other cells, with other like cells that need to be replaced, right? Other membranes. Membranes get damaged, the mitochondria gets damaged, it needs cholesterol, and it needs lipids to repair.
And it starts distributing them.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing. That's like ancestral biology. Like it's intentional, right? It's like, wow, this is an amazing little process here that the human body can create these small molecules that deliver my precious cargo. And I think that's really important that we understand that, like the precious cargo of fat
that's gonna
for
fix
energy,
things.
right? So what would happen?
Well, not only the energy.
If you weren't a fat burner.
Right.
What is the LDL going to do? It's not serving a purpose. It's going to go down. LDL goes down on a low-carb diet. LDL goes down on a high-carb diet. Because that's not your cargo. That's not your cargo that you utilize. When you're on a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, LDL is how I'm getting stuff around.
So then what happens when you're on that high
So
carb?
this is really important because people are going to get a lot of pushback from their doctor. What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my LDL, right, when I switch from a high carb to a low carb diet? Okay. First of all, high carbohydrate diet, right? What do we have as far as our lipid panel? And this is really, really important because we talked about metabolic syndrome as those 5 different things.
Right.
Right? And 2 of those are related to lipids, and that's triglycerides and HDL. And you will have high triglycerides and low HDL. The triglycerides are backing up because fat's not your fuel. Triglycerides is fat in the bloodstream. Okay? If that's not your primary fuel source, it's going to linger. It's going to stick around. So triglycerides will be elevated. This is your typical metabolic syndrome. And HDL is low. You have insulin resistance. You don't have a good mechanism to deal with the excess amount of triglycerides. That's not your fuel. It's just there, mucking up the machinery, causing pancreatitis, right? Like you think of all the problems related to a fatty liver, right? Exactly. So all these things are going to back up. So when you switch to a low carb, high fat diet, you're going to need more boats.
So
Triglycerides will drop because why would it be sticking around? It's not going to stick around. Fat in the bloodstream, it's not going to stick around because that's your primary fuel source. Fat's a beautiful thing. It really should be our primary energy source because, like, if you think of the food pyramids or just in general, forget about protein. You got 3 macronutrients essentially, right? You have carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. We've been on this carbs as our primary fuel source since the 70s, or even longer, right? The food pyramid, 1977 U.S. dietary guidelines, right, saying, hey, carbohydrates is a good energy source. I'm saying, no way. You can either burn carbs or fat. Which one do you want to burn? We've done this experiment already.
Right.
As carbohydrates as a major fuel source.
It doesn't last long.
It doesn't last 6 to 8 hours. It's worthless. It's that tiny little tank.
And you run out, and then you need more.
Yeah,
On a regular,
keep filling that tank 3 times a day, right? You got to keep it going.
Not even that. I mean, if you're really active, you got to eat all the time.
You do, right? Instead, why not use fat as an energy source? And there's a lot of cool things about fat. We should talk about fat sometime. But talk about like how it can expand and contract based on our energy needs. It also gives you this metabolic flexibility. Your metabolic rate will be higher. There's a lot of really cool things. Advantages of doing an LCHF ketogenic diet. But one thing that you're going to have to be able to defend yourself with is, oh my gosh, my LDL just went up. My cholesterol level just went up. Oh my gosh, what's going on?
Yeah.
Right? Why is there so much LDL? That's the boat that delivers my precious cargo. But there's some other changes within the liver that causes your LDL to go up. The body doesn't need to make it if you're eating it. So when you eat more fat, and I would say animal fat specifically, yes.
Yes, because you talked about let's not eat the other.
Right, let's not eat the other, thank you. Yeah, without saying the V word. But like as you're eating more saturated fat, it's going to come with more cholesterol, right? So you're not going to need to make as much. That's an expensive process. It's like 100 ATPs to make cholesterol if you don't eat it. The body would rather, because it's smart, would rather just get it from food. Why not get it from food versus making it? If you have it in your food, okay, you don't need all these receptors in the liver to try to gobble up as much cholesterol as it can. If you're on a low-fat, low-cholesterol diet, you're going to have a lot of receptors to try to engulf and make your cholesterol to be able to distribute it throughout the body. Now, all the cells make cholesterol, okay?
Yes.
Liver is responsible for like 70% of cholesterol production. The brain makes its own and we get rid of it, okay? But the amount of cholesterol in our body is finite. It should stay pretty much the same. We're building and repairing cells, right? We're fighting off infections. We're doing all these things with cholesterol that are vitally important, making hormones, we can get in the weeds on that. But like, this is so vitally important as a building block for all these things that we need. What a beautiful system, right? And the brain's gotta have this, right? But it also needs to be able to dispose of it, to get rid of it, to recycle it. And we do that through bile acids, bile salts, right? In order for us to absorb fat, you need bile acids, right? And this is cholesterol. This is the recirculation of cholesterol. And if you take in too much, you're going to eliminate more. And this is done with the gut. I mean, think about it. There's systems involved here. There's the liver, there's the GI tract, right? We've got, muscle cells that need it. Everybody needs it. There's somebody who's making it. We're making hormones with it as part of our immune function. It's helping us have memories and thoughts, right? It's so vitally important. And we are able, because of this beautiful mechanism, to take more in if need be, and excrete more if need be as well, to eliminate more. And we do that through bile acids. And bile acids are vitally important for fat absorption. It's like kind of emulsifier.
Okay.
Think about milk.
Right.
Fat and water mixed together. Tiny little droplets. That's what bile acids do. They make bigger droplets that go through the lymphatic system and then into our bodies. But without it, you couldn't absorb fat. You couldn't absorb fat, you're done.
So then what happens when somebody, so for bile, acids, what happens when somebody doesn't have a gallbladder?
You're still going to make it.
Because it comes directly from the liver?
Just the storage.
Okay.
But how do we end up with a gallbladder removal in the first place? You didn't eat enough fat. This is the demonization. Like, how many cholecystectomies do we do? How many gallbladders do we rip out every single day, right? Because you didn't use it. You're going to lose it, right? So what happens is, if you don't eat enough fat, you've got bile acids sitting inside your gallbladder that don't squirt into the GI tract. It just sits there and gets thicker and thicker and becomes sludge and become a stone. Because utilizing your gallbladder means that you're going to be eating fat frequently, so you can emulsify and absorb that fat. So gallbladder, not critical for the existence of life, but bile salts sure as heck are. Your liver will make it. You will absorb fat. It's not a problem on a low-carb ketogenic diet. When you're eating a significant amount of fat, you'll be just fine. Trust me. We've seen so many people do just fine without a gallbladder, as you know.
As I know, yeah.
So, but that.
Well, because the industry removes a lot of them.
Yeah. They're really good at doing that. Let's see. Okay, so let's talk about what exactly is in that lipid, LDL.
LDL.
Right? So I guess we should talk about cholesterol first. Cholesterol.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of doing that with the cell membrane and
phospholipids,
phospholipids and the bile acids.
Right. But when somebody says, hey, your cholesterol's high, specifically, we see total cholesterol. Okay, that's usually how it comes on your lipid panel.
It's always total cholesterol, yeah.
Total cholesterol. LDL is not measured. It's calculated.
Oh. I
So
never knew that.
yeah, so it sucks. It's not even that accurate, right? So
well, it's still only a picture of time, like a blip at the.
Yeah, right. But when you get a fasting, and this is important that you're fasting for this test. So what we really want to do is have all the fat cleared out. All the, like I said, when you eat something, bile acids emulsify and it goes into the bloodstream. That would falsely elevate what your fasting triglyceride level is.
Oh, okay.
And we really want a really good triglyceride. We want to know how much fat is lingering. Okay. If you eat a fatty meal, obviously it's going to be really high, and it's going to really mess up your numbers.
So when you eat a fatty meal, how long would you fast for before
12
you have?
hours.
So 12
hours. 12
hours.
hours, not 11, not 11 and a half. David Feldman did a really good study, and he started looking. And he was interesting because he did a cool study where he ate a ton of carbs, and he watched his LDL go down. And when he didn't eat a bunch of carbs, even fasting will raise your LDL level. Okay, he's one of those hyper responders, and that's kind of a cool thing. It's like, It has to do with those LDL receptors, whether or not they're up or down.
Okay.
Where were we?
We talked.
Okay. Oh, total cholesterol. So total cholesterol.
It's okay.
Triglycerides, and then there's LDL, and then there's HDL, and then you might see some other ratios that I think are totally meaningless, but you'll see total cholesterol to HDL ratio.
Yeah.
But what that is taken into consideration, okay, so your LDL is calculated.
Okay.
Your triglyceride is measured from VLDL.
It's not even a real number.
It's not even a real number.
Okay.
So how do you take total cholesterol minus HDL? Because HDL has cholesterol in it.
Okay.
It's the reverse. It's recycling. It's grabbing it off of LDL and grabbing it from tissues and taking it back to liver for recycling.
Okay.
So that's HDL's job.
So it's the garbage man.
It's the garbage man. That's pretty simple, huh?
Yeah.
And I want to say this too. I think this is really important. Everyone understands. There's no good or bad lipid. There is no good or bad lipoprotein. There just isn't. Okay?
That's why our body makes
Our body makes everything.
Okay.
What's not good is the high triglyceride, low HDL.
Okay.
That's not normal.
Now, why would that not be good?
That would not be good because of all the problems that you have with excess amount of fat.
Okay.
Right? Because fat's backing up into the bloodstream. And if you also were to measure saturated fat or free fatty acids in the bloodstream, it's like the fat cells are oozing.
Oh,
There's no place for it to go. So if you eat a bunch of carbohydrates and there's no room for them to go, it converts to triglycerides.
Okay.
That's why we see people who eat a high amount of carbohydrates have higher than normal triglycerides. And really that number should be less than 100.
Okay.
Right around 100, 125. You want to give a little bit of room there. And your HDL, garbage man, should be like 70. Okay? Mm-hmm. Not a lot of people like that. We're talking like less than 10% of the population have that perfect like lipid panel. So most people have high triglycerides, low HDL, and that ratio is typically over 2.
Okay.
Okay? Most people, and again, when we talk about the metabolic syndrome, remember those 5 things. 2 of those is high triglyceride, low HDL.
Yeah.
I didn't say anything about LDL.
No.
LDL is not part of this equation. LDL is not the boogeyman. This isn't the lousy lipoprotein.
So, but they're making it like that, right?
Right. Yeah. So getting back to LDL, it's calculated total cholesterol minus HDL and then 1/5 of your triglycerides.
All right.
It's also VLDL is what they're measuring there. So how much is the liver kicking out as far as triglycerides has everything to do with how much extra carbohydrates you have.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I like that. All right. Let's see.
So, where are we going now?
Let's see. Function of LDL. Okay, so you mentioned for cellular membranes, and membranes we're talking about not just the cell that we think in our head, right? But it's also a really important membrane is the mitochondria.
Right.
We need cholesterol for the mitochondria as well. In order for the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, to operate properly, okay, you must have this cholesterol-rich membrane, phospholipid membrane. So that's why I think metabolic syndrome, if we look at life through the lens metabolically, that's the problem. That's what's causing all this chronic disease is the mitochondria, the health of the mitochondria, the health of the cell to make everything healthy. And we'll see from this, like, how we damage our mitochondria leading to other diseases down the road. Okay? So anything that reduces cholesterol, anything that reduces LDL is going to create a problem. Statins.
Statins.
Right. Okay. So cholesterol is an important subunit or function or molecular structure for the development or the creation of so many different things. You have a list of those things.
What kind of?
Yeah, you do. I know you do. I saw it.
Not all of them. But
so where did you get most of this information? You got it from Dr. Nadir Ali.
Yes, and then
interventional cardiologist in Texas. So if you find anywhere online, you look him up and you watch some of his videos. They are deep. He gets into the weeds, but get the general idea. I think that's really important to go, hey.
Yeah. He does. Oh, Yeah, he gets more into the weeds than ever.
Yeah. Okay, so he talks about bile acids, how important they are. He talks about immune function, right?
Yeah, he
Hormone
talks a
production.
lot about immune
function, yes. And that,
Yeah.
I will tell you, I see that more frequently than I want to admit. When I see somebody hit the hospital, that's what I'm looking at. What's going on? Why are they here?
Yeah.
What is there? And you probably see that too.
Yeah, for
Right.
sepsis. And of course, we don't always look at what do their lipid panels look like? What do their vitamin studies look like? Do they really have, we look at, well, for cancer, of course, we know that the source is their white blood cell counts going down because sometimes most of the times the chemotherapy causes problems.
Right.
But then, like people who are healthy that go into the hospital, and they have these overwhelming infections, well, what got them there? And then you have to start looking at, okay, so you do...
So many variables.
There is a lot of variables. But how healthy is that person?
Right,
You have to look at the health of the person, and in order to do that, you have to look at, unfortunately, the lipid panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that is, it says here that it's, the immune, it's a modulation of inflammation, it does cancer surveillance, it does cell repair, it does immune surveillance.
Right.
It does a lot.
It's kind of the unsung hero, and here we are trying to kill it.
And nobody is talking about that. Like, okay, so when we have all of these overwhelming infections, and of course we just went through a pandemic, well, what were their counts like?
Right.
There were other things happening.
Oh, COVID was very interesting when it came to LDL. In acute phase, as well as where were they at baseline, right? Acute phase sepsis, there's some really interesting information about sepsis and LDL and survival.
Yeah.
Right? And that PCSK9 has a lot to do with that. Right?
So, okay, you're going to have, because you just brought it up. So what is that?
We can go into it later.
Okay, we'll go into it later.
Okay.
Okay, so it also talks about vitamin D.
Vitamin D production, right?
Yeah, it talks about, it facilitates the production of vitamin D, and vitamin D is huge for our immune system.
Right. So it needs to be activated by the sunlight, right?
Well, not only that, we can also absorb it with, I think, mushrooms. They have a lot of vitamin D, red meat.
Right. But what I found is interesting is vitamin D, because of it being a lipid, and now cholesterol is also a lipid, very different structure.
It's a fat-soluble vitamin.
Right. It's a waxy substance, essentially, that is and behaves like a lipid molecule, right? But what's interesting is that the vitamin D, once it needs to be activated by the sun, right? And there's a difference between D2 and D3. But what's important is that you eat it with fat. We're missing that. How many people take their vitamin D with a fatty meal? For maximum absorption.
Oh, well, actually, I guess I do.
Oh, you didn't? Wasn't intentional. You weren't like, hey, I know, I didn't. Like, how many pharmacists will tell their patients, hey, this vitamin D needs to be taken with a high fatty meal? It's not on the package. Nobody tells you anything like that.
Well, I drink it with my coffee that has heavy whipping cream. So,
then you're set. Yeah, I didn't know that until just recently. I'm like, man, I need to change. I really wish more pharmacists would listen to this, because I think this is really important as we're talking about the side effects of statins.
Well, and they also
because we don't warn them properly.
More about how the mechanism of actions work.
Yes, we've been fed something totally different.
Yeah.
Totally different. So it's also important for our hormone production.
Yes, hormone is big.
Absolutely. Hormones like what? Testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, aldosterone.
I didn't ever think about aldosterone.
Yeah, you think about
adrenal.
Sodium and fluid regulation, right? That's super important, right? And here we are knocking it out.
Maybe that's why people are so tired.
Yeah, right? Maybe they've got so much extra swelling or whatever because of... But you think about testosterone, that explains... So when we talk about here is the physiology of the body in relation to cholesterol, you need to think about the pathophysiology. when you lower cholesterol production, you get the opposite of what we're saying. So the opposite of enough testosterone in men, would be erectile dysfunction. You don't have enough testosterone. Estrogen in women, you don't have enough estrogen. What happens?
Oh my God! Amazingly, we have a lot of hot flashes.
Okay. Well, here's another one.
Also fatigue, and then we start to, I don't know. There's a lot of things that go wrong in menopause. Thank you.
Right. You don't need to help that along.
No.
Right? But here's another one. Cortisol. Like, both of our cortisol levels are elevated right now because we're under stress, right? This is a normal physiological response to stress. This is appropriate, right? We need cholesterol in order to make cortisol to get up and moving and start moving, right? And doing stuff, right?
Have stress.
Also, another one that's really important is ubiquinol, coenzyme Q10.
Yeah, I don't know very much about that.
Think of it like it's a way to augment the electron transport chain. That is that kind of that zapping of the battery of that mitochondria.
Okay, because decrease of it does actually affect the mitochondria health.
Muscle. So this is probably the number one most common side effect of statins is muscle aches.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It is. That's like first on the list.
The number one, right? Muscle-related myalgia, right? But according to the manufacturer, it's not that common. It's really rare.
It's pretty common.
It's really common. So in the Jupiter study, they had a third of their patients that could not take it. They couldn't tolerate it, but they just called it, we called it the run-in period. So like we weeded out people that couldn't tolerate the medication, but they never really disclosed what the side effects. This is because it's an industry-funded study, which I would never trust that. I mean, 75% of industry-funded studies come out positive. We can go on about industry-funded conflicts of interest for days, right? So coenzyme Q10 depletion is going to hurt your muscles as well as your heart muscle, right? All muscles throughout the body. It's not going to perform well at all. So you should be taking coenzyme Q10 with your statin. How many people do that? You want to drop another $35 a month, take that coenzyme Q10 to try to offset the fact that you're destroying it and not producing it?
Well, if you're going to take it, I would drop some money and take that in.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, if you need to. But what population needs to take a statin?
Well, one that has probably already had
already had a heart attack, but you have a high triglyceride and low HDL. That would be the people that I would use it in. And I would also, to be very definitive about that, I would look at their calcium score, their CAC, right? Let's do a CT of their blood vessels. So we're going to look at the blood vessels of the heart. How much of that do they have vessel disease? How much old vessel disease? How much calcification do we have? Okay. How active is your disease, right? Old disease, CTA, which would be like soft tissue, soft plaque. Then we could see how active your disease and how it's progressing. But if you have a CAC score above 0, that means you've got some vessel disease.
Right. But below 100, I think is okay.
Yeah. Would you use it on those patients?
No. I mean, I don't prescribe anything.
Right,
I am just saying
right. So
for
what
myself,
is the niche for statins, right?
I would not take a statin.
Right. So if it's secondary prevention, it's like the number needed to treat is 39. That means only 1 out of 39 people will benefit. Okay. But if it's for primary prevention, it's like 1 out of 83.
What's the difference between primary and secondary?
Primary, you haven't had a heart attack.
Okay.
Right? No events. Secondary, you've had an event.
Okay. And
you might still be smoking, and you'll have a positive, calcium score. Your calcium score will be elevated. You have high triglycerides, low HDL, elevated HSCRP, C-reactive protein. You're a walking time bomb.
So
you're ready for number 2.
For those particular people to take it.
But what's really important that people understand this, it's not through the mechanism of LDL. It's more of an anti-inflammatory, maybe an anticoagulant. It's another mechanism. It's not through LDL, because we know, as you know from reading all this, is that reducing LDL causes nothing but problems.
It does.
And there are drugs that wipe it out to almost zero. The PCSK9s, I mean, I've seen people like less than 30 on their LDL, right? And we should be 100, especially later in life. Having a higher cholesterol and a higher LDL means that you're going to live longer. You're going to have better cognitive function, right? You're going to be on it.
So for the side effects of statins, but that's what I was going to bring up later, is that people have memory problems. They start
brain fog.
Yeah, and they they almost are having dementia.
Yeah.
And that's from the statin.
Right. And
they don't talk about that very much.
Yeah, but see, here's the thing. Like when I was in pharmacy, I would ask patients, do you have muscle aches? Do you have brain fog? And surprisingly enough, there's a lot of people that have this problem. Okay? Do you have difficulties getting words out? Do you have difficulties remembering where you parked your car? Where's your key? Like, yeah, like it's almost like, it's age related. Like, no, it goes up significantly. So matter of fact, we even did a dementia analysis where they had these people take this test, took them off the statin for 6 weeks, tested them, and then put them back on it. Most of the patients, they improved when they were off the statins for that 6 weeks, and it returned, their dementia returned when they restarted them. Okay, so I can't give medical advice. However, if you have a side effect from a medication, or you think you may have a side effect from a medication, if you stop it momentarily to see if the side effects dissipate, and then when you restart they come back, you can kind of narrow it down and say, hey, maybe this isn't so helpful. But it's something like I read somewhere that 75% of people who start statins stop taking it after a year. I hope that we say goodbye to statins eventually, but I don't know. That may never happen. Yes.
Well, there's other things, like it causes liver problems, because now I know, I'm not exactly sure how the doctors monitor that, but you should, or it's, it says in the literature, you should at least monitor your liver enzymes. There has been problems where the liver enzymes have quadrupled, and people run into problems.
Not super common, but yeah, this certainly can happen.
We're supposed to be watching currently. So
really,
yeah,
okay, yeah, that's.
But I see, also there's other stuff happening where there's huge inflammatory responses, and something else is going on.
Yeah. The fact that LDL has the ability to pick up and sense when a virus or bacteria is around. I think that's fascinating. I mean, it is part of the immune system. It is going to engulf, because it senses when a bacteria or a virus is nearby. So that's the quorum sensing that Dr. Ali talked about. So when a bacteria invades you or a virus invades you, it's going to send out these AGRs. In other words, molecules or chemicals that say, we can build here, we can take hold, we can cause an infection. We did this with rat lungs. Exposed them to chlamydia, pneumonia, or and looked at them and said, okay, how was LDL able to actually recognize it as a foreign invader, and then engulf it? So now think about this. If LDL has the ability to recognize bacteria and allow, once it senses it, grabs a hold of it, macrophages are now involved. Macrophages, white blood cells, engulf the LDL cholesterol, right, with the bacteria and all. That's why in those plaques we see the LDL, but we also see other things in that plaque that I think are really important. Things like H. pylori, chlamydia pneumoniae, mouth organisms like I'm going to say it wrong. Porphyromonas gingivalis. Oh my gosh. So they're at the scene of the crime too, right?
So what you're saying is that maybe the LDL is the actual thing that's engulfing these particular bacteria that are now present in the bloodstream that are against these plaques.
And where does that LDL end up?
It ends up on the plaque.
It ends up in the plaque, but the macrophage got excited, engulfed it, and then the macrophage became a foam cell. That's the plaque, right? Dead white blood cells, right? And that's where it's going to reside. But what's interesting, if we look at cardiovascular disease as a whole throughout the world, okay, it's the inflammation that's driving this. It's the oxidized, glycated LDL particle that's at the scene of the crime.
Okay.
But it's there to help, right? Is it the arsonist or is it the fireman trying to put out the fire, right? What is it doing, right? Mm-hmm. Why is it there? And what's the most common source of inflammation worldwide? Gingivitis.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Thank you, sugar. Oh. Right? Think about it, like, okay, here's everyone's got gingivitis. They've got all these organisms in their mouth, right? And also like SIBO, right? Where like you've got this overgrowth of bacteria in your gut, right? Those organisms are found there too, right? What the heck is H. pylori? 30 to 40% of the world have this organism sitting in their stomach, right? And who's there to put out the fire? LDL. It's going to go all throughout the body, right?
So do you think it's like a sensor and it tells the macrophages, hey, I'm right here. And
macrophages love oxidized and glycated LDL. That excites it. And it goes, food. This is our job. We are going to engulf, right?
And destroy you, okay.
And, right, but it just happens to be there, right? How do we normally deal with this? If that LDL that attached to that bacteria didn't get glycated and oxidized, it's going back to the liver and you're going to poop it out. You're going to get rid of that bacteria. I hate to break it to you, but we don't live in a sterile environment.
No.
There's
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And what I'm saying is this very important molecule, this LDL molecule, is so vitally important to our immune system. And I think we're going to learn more and more about it as time goes on and we start seeing more studies. There's some neat stuff with sepsis, right? Like how does LDL cholesterol help us? And I think it's very, very valuable to go when somebody hits the ER and we know what their baseline lipid panel is and when they have it now. Then we kind of know like what should we spend our resources on? What's the prognosis for this patient? Are they going to get really sick or not? Are they on something that's lowering their LDL? And that's I really don't think statins are helpful. I think they're more harmful than they are helpful. And the fact of the matter is that we've been duped. We've been duped when it comes to the statin trials because these things, absolute risk reduction is more like 1%.
That's what the study.
But you published and said it's 36% or it's 46% in the Jupiter study. Like, what is the real numbers here? Yeah. And I think it's relevant. And I think even as a pharmacist, we've been duped. We've been so duped because we think that 46% relative risk meant something. It means almost nothing. It's such a small difference. For example, the difference between absolute and relative risk is like this. The difference between 0.5% and 1% is 50%. Or that's the relative.
Right.
The relative difference between.
So 0.5
right,
to 1.
But it's still a really tiny number because the absolute is 0.5%.
So they can use whatever wording they want. Is that what you're saying?
They did, and they tricked you. They tricked us all, right? You tricked us because you used a statistical analysis that we weren't familiar with. If I just say, that's a 50% reduction, you're thinking like, it's 1 and 2. That's how most of us think.
But it's not. It's 0.1 to 0.
Well, so the amount of people in a lot of these studies, so the amount of people that die from cardiovascular disease is really, first of all, it's small.
Okay.
Like dying from an event is really, really tiny. Like it's 3%. Okay? It's not a huge population. And then when you go on the drug, it's 1%, right? But 1 divided by 3 is 33%. But the difference is maybe 2. Not much of a difference, right? So when you compare the placebo to the control group, it comes out magically as 30%. Not enough people died from this all-cause mortality, right? So the difference is really only a small amount. You're going to treat 100 people for what? To save 1? That's a lot of side effects is what I'm saying. I'm saying the side effects, the risk-benefit is horrible. And the next closest drug would be antidepressants at 10%. Is 10% effective. I wonder why. Maybe mental illness has something to do with the mitochondria and brain energy. And that's why we all have problems with mental illness, because we're not fueling our bodies properly so we can fuel our brains properly. And we're damaging our mitochondria, right? Sorry.
It's okay.
I get all excited. But as a pharmacist,
this is good.
we didn't talk about the run-in period. We didn't, when we're studying this, we know, oh, well, a third of the patients didn't want to do the study. Maybe they couldn't tolerate the drug. And how many people would walk away from a bunch of money because, they want to be in this study? That's why you're there. You're going to make some money, right? A third of those people couldn't even tolerate the medication because of muscle aches, brain fog. Muscle aches by far the most common. Who wants... And so not only have you destroyed the coenzyme Q10, but if you want to make muscle, you need a membrane. To enlarge your muscle cells, you need a membrane. And in order to make that membrane, you need cholesterol and you need fat. So if you, Dr. Ali, like where could you find Dr. Ali? EatMostlyFatAli.com, right? That's what he's on. Here's a cardiologist, interventional cardiologist, who's tired of putting in stents and going, hey, you should be eating mostly fat, not carbs. We've gone down just such the wrong road. And how do you fix this? Do you realize what we're talking about? All the misinformation, all the literature has to be completely rewritten. We have to educate physicians.
I don't think it has to be rewritten. I think it just has to have... It is a mess.
Google that stuff. It's horrible.
No, I don't want to Google it because I'll just get upset. So no, but I think it is. It's upsetting.
Yeah.
To be lied to for so many years. But I think that if we just do maybe studies again, and actually you do them over.
Because you're totally right. Because we haven't done like a carnivore or a low carb diet other than VertaHealth with 5 years. Right. Is there a longer study? These food studies are so difficult. Do them for a much longer period of time to say, this is the outcome, right? This is all-cause mortality. This is the amount of MI. This is, these are the events. This
Even
is the cancer.
If you do low
everything.
Carb, I think,
It's really starting to look, because this hasn't been out for that long. You can go back to Atkins, right? I mean, we have case studies. We have, plenty of examples of people that are thriving, obviously, and not dying on a very low carbohydrate diet.
Yes.
Everything gets better. When you do a low carbohydrate diet, 2 out of the 5 triglycerides drop, HDL comes up in patients who do low carb. The LDL may go up. Don't flip out. And don't let your doctor flip out on you either. Hey, doc, I did improve 2 out of the 5, right? And matter of fact, doc, LDL is not part of that equation. LDL is a horrible predictor of cardiovascular disease. Insulin, triglycerides, and HDL are a way better predictor. Waist circumference and triglycerides are probably the best bet when it comes to cardiovascular disease, which is the #1 killer.
It still is, yes.
Yeah. It's not going to change. Not right until we start lowering insulin.
Yeah. Well, how long has statins been out?
Oh,
So what did you think?
how long have we been doing this? I mean, we had drugs that got recalled. We're going to count those? Because those were a disaster. Yeah,
But-
the list is huge.
Yeah, there's 1, 2,
7. And most of these do cross the blood-brain barrier and reduce the cholesterol inside the brain. We didn't talk about the brain. That's really important. Most of the cholesterol inside the brain is the myelin sheath. Right? It creates this myelin sheath, which is kind of like this
It's a protector.
Protector. It makes an insulated protector so that electricity doesn't go everywhere. It's channeled.
Right.
Right? So you can have a thought. Why would you ever want to reduce that? Like, you think about babies. They have so much cholesterol inside their brain, right? You couldn't make a child without fat and cholesterol.
They looked at brain function of babies when their cholesterol was low.
Right.
And found that they had a lot of cognitive issues.
Yeah. People that are do a very, very low-fat diet. I know there's islands where they don't have access to the food that they used to have, and so they're dependent upon Western food, which as cheap as you can possibly get it, right? Because these people are so poor that they have a high amount of retardation amongst the children because they're not able to form a brain, right? It's a reason why mom's milk is full of fat, right? You need fat and you need cholesterol to build a person, along with protein, right?
Well, if you look at all mammals' milk, isn't it?
It's all fat.
It's all fat.
Right. And it changes. The fat concentration drops as the baby gets older. But I think we should talk about, for a second, just bile acids. And let's talk about an egg.
Okay.
An egg. Okay. Egg's loaded with cholesterol, right? It's fat and protein. Okay. You must eat the fat with the protein. Not egg whites. And there's a reason. You make the protein more absorbable when you eat it with fat. So fat and protein must come together for the bile acids. The bile salts. The bile salts are released, like we talked about, the cholesterol. The bile salts are released when you eat fat to emulsify it. But the bile salts also add more acidity so you could absorb more protein. You need acid to break down protein. So nature gives it the way it's intended, right, as protein and fat, and almost on a 1-to-1 ratio. That's why I'm such a proponent of animal meat and eggs with the yolk. Egg whites by themselves don't have anywhere near the absorption because there's no bile acids or acids to help absorb that protein. You need the yolk, not to mention all the vitamins of the yolk.
I know.
You couldn't eat enough eggs. You really couldn't. We need to calm down about this whole cholesterol thing. I know the American Heart Association says, less than 300 mil, but they're so contradictory. Like every organization has their different cutoffs, and it makes no sense. They say
cholesterol all the time.
All the time. They say,
cholesterol.
Well, this is to confuse us. The cholesterol, don't take in more than 300 milligrams per day. Well, that's an egg and a half. Really? But then they'll turn around and say, well, it's no longer a molecule of concern. Well, stand by your guns, man. Tell me that it's okay to eat. I'm telling you it's okay to eat. You need cholesterol, as we have outlined here, for hormone, for immune function, for cell membranes, to make a better you. Yeah, we don't want to fall prey to the fact that we don't have any cholesterol. That's a nightmare waiting to happen. And I think that's what we see. I definitely see more infections in the hospital, people with low LDLs, right? And I think these PCSK9s are a disaster. They didn't help with all-cause mortality, increase of death. PCSK9s need to disappear because knocking someone's LDL to less than 30, almost to zero, is very dangerous, and yet we're prescribed this all the time. How many, do you guys do that at the infusion center?
Do what?
PCSK9, the Repatha.
No.
Good. It's good to hear. Oh, well. Anyways, thanks for talking about cholesterol with me. I feel like you gave my wife a break. She doesn't want to hear all this all the time while she's in the shower. Hey.
It's all right. I do it at home with my husband.
Oh, that's good.
He's just on the same page as you are.
Yeah.
He's like, I've known about this for 5 years.
Oh,
okay,
I know.
I know.
No,
I know you have. Thank you.
See, there's information out there. There really is, and you got to dig for it. So, unscriptedpharmacist.com. I'm pretty active. We'll get more active with getting the information out there and trying to fix some of this misinformation. So, cholesterol, it's your friend. Don't demonize it. It's beautiful. If you're on a statin, you should really talk to your doctor about whether or not you're having side effects and whether or not it's helpful for you.
Yeah,
and
just
I
have
really
a conversation.
Secondary, not primary prevention. If you've had a heart attack, that may help you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Lenora. That was
Thanks.
fun.
Oh my gosh, I always learn so much. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Unscripted Pharmacist Podcast with Kyle Rootsaert and Lenora Casey. Please like our program by clicking on the thumbs up button. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion, please jot us a note in the comment section. And be sure to subscribe to the Unscripted Pharmacist Podcast. Produced by Chris Stevenson, recorded at the studios of Calaveras.